Good evening. Tonight I'm going to take you on a journey into the burned forests of the West. And I, like I'm sure many of you, love green forests and water and many of the life-giving things that we enjoy there, the peacefulness, the tranquility, the views. And I enjoy these places with my family, with my friends, and I'm sure I share that love with you and with all the plants and animals that live there. Whether it be the sequoia groves in California or the western larch that need lots of light, or the beauty of Yosemite, or the great views we have here of Mount Hood in the upper parts of the Columbia River Gorge. We have a lot of landscapes that we treasure, and we worry about them when they're burned by fire. Over the last 2 decades, I've spent considerable time in these forests with scientists and even with whistleblowers who have risked everything to tell their stories to me. And this whistleblower had worked for 20 years, lighting fires to restore fire to the landscape, and he knew what a dead tree was and what a dead tree wasn't. And he came forward to us to ask for help. I've been in the courtroom advocating for Mount Hood and other wild places, and I've spent considerable time in a lot of these landscapes learning from experts who study data-driven research, and I've also spent time with communities. In recent years, we've had large, intense wildfires, including one right here in our backyard, the Eagle Creek Fire, which burned through 50,000 acres of the Columbia River Gorge. News reports said the forest was destroyed. People worried about their loved one. Soon after the fire, I took to the air, to the ground, and I went into the forest to see how they were doing and how quick they were coming back. I was invited to Cascade Locks Elementary School to speak to the children who had been evacuated for a month to 2 months during the fire. I was asked by the principal and the librarian to take the kids into the charcoal forest to see how nature was moving forward rapidly after the fire as a metaphor for their own healing. I also have spent considerable time taking some time off work as well, volunteering to rebuild trails in the gorge. This is on the Angel's Rest Trail, and carrying beams up the mountain to repair places where they were damaged. The trail was damaged, but amazingly, we had to clear the vegetation off the trail within less than 6 months after the fire. Move lots of big rocks. Also worked to set up time-lapse cameras in areas that were severely burned, which are oftentimes considered destroyed, but actually are ecological treasures bouncing back. This is a time-lapse camera showing 6 months in just a few photographs. So you can see from brown and black to brown and black and green and yellow coming on back in our rainforest. Now, we've had some really scary fires in California, and fire is powerful. Fire is elemental. Fire can and does destroy homes. These fires are different in some ways because they're primarily wind-driven embers. And if you look even where this home is gone, you see green vegetation, and I'll come back to that. The fire front never moved, the flame fronts never moved through Paradise, California. They were ember-driven fires that started structures on fire. People have lost their homes, and a lot of people have lost their homes, heightening the need for us to find solutions for homes and communities. We have 40 million homes in the fire plain, in fire-prone landscapes. What do we do about them? Is that different, or is it the same as what we do in forests? Fire has been a part of these landscapes since the Pleistocene. Since the ice sheets receded, people have lived and coexisted with fire and used fire. So on the left, we have a thick bark ponderosa pine. On the right, does anybody know what that is? That is the space shuttle. And we borrowed the technology from the ponderosa pine tree to make the tiles on the space shuttle so on re-entry that space shuttle would not overheat. That ponderosa pine tree is it's in eastern Oregon, so it's probably 300-400 years old. It has probably burned 10, 20, 30 times, and it's still alive. They have the capacity, and they're hardened against fire. And we'll come back to that lesson from nature. The trees on the right are whitebark pine. They need fire to spread their seeds. They need the Clark's nutcracker to spread their seeds, to open them up. They're really hard, and they only open up if they're softened by fire. The western larch on the other side of the slide, it needs fire to kill all the trees around it because it is thirsty for light. It must have lots of light, particularly when it's small. It's not shade tolerant. One of my favorite little birds, the woodpecker, very annoying cartoon, but a really cool bird. Black, so that can't be seen against the black trees, and it raises its young in the softened trees. And to a blackback woodpecker, a burned forest is a vast supermarket of tasty grubs and treats. There's many, many critters that love fire. So if we just go back 85 years, right, our lifetime, or a lifetime that we could live, we see here in our backyard big, intense wildfires. They burned Burnt Lake, Mirror Lake. That's from Sherrard Point and Larch Mountain. And this is on the north side of Mount Hood. They've burned, and they'll all burn again. And here's Cascade Locks. And that's what we see. Large, intense wildfires is what we have in the wet west sides of the Cascades. We don't have periodic lower intensity fires. So pretty much every fire, every green forest you enjoy today burned at some point, right? They're all born in fire. Now, people have used fire for a long time, whether it was the Plains Indians or the Kalapuya that inhabited the region that we now call home. When settlers first came west, they noted how open the Willamette Valley was and that it was an oak woodland. They used fire for its benefits, to clear the forest out, to clear land and have grasslands for basket making, for providing habitat for game, for corralling game. These were not just hunter-gatherers. They were using fire in very complex ways. And the great wisdom that they had was that they knew that they could not control large wildfire. Now, settlers came west, and they didn't want burned landscapes like on the right. They set up fire lookouts, and they started to suppress fire at all costs. And the belief was if you applied enough labor and technology, that you could control fire, and you could put it out. And today, big fires, just bring in the bulldozers, just bring in the super tankers, just think that you can control nature. And then the other thing that's proposed is just bring in the logging equipment and thin the forest, just empty it. Empty the fuels, which is really the forest. Now, these activities come at significant cost to our landscapes. These are cat lines on the ridge lines, and sometimes they work to prevent a fire from crossing the ridge lines, sometimes they don't, and they always do a lot of damage, and these are actually in a lot of Native American sites are found on ridge lines. And of course, there's no review, there's no careful thought, they're just going whole hog, and there's a massive fire industrial complex that is spending oodles of our money. And I've been asking myself, why do we continue to pursue these approaches, these, I guess, attempts to control wildfire when they're coming at such great cost and they're not working? When there's wisdom, if we just listen from our elders on what solutions actually will work to protect homes and communities and keep us safe. Well, Bambi has had an incredible influence on people's beliefs about wildfire. And we heard earlier about characters and fiction and how that influences how we think. Smokey has also had an incredible influence. Some scholars say that Bambi has had more influence on our beliefs on wildfire than every scientific paper put together on how wildlife respond to fire. Bambi, careless hunters, set the fire, and poor Bambi fled from the flames, and it was big and scary. And it's forever seared this belief I think that many people hold, that I frequently encounter, that fire kills all wildlife. Everybody loses when a forest burns. Now, these are deeply held. Thou shalt not destroy thy forest. I think that's quite telling. It's a very man dominate over nature, tisk tisk, scorn message. Yours to enjoy, not to destroy. Forest fires burn more than trees, again, suggesting all the wildlife are killed. Now, of course, the birds aren't fledglings usually when it's fire season. They can fly away. Why? Why? Remember, only you can prevent forest fires. Stop this shameful waste, utilitarian thinking coming into the mix. Prevent the madness. Now, what was the origin of these messages? Well, it was the Wartime Advertising Council, and what was their agenda? Well, you can see here in these posters a very horrible caricatures and foreign enemies and scaring people about fires. We need to preserve these forests from fire so that they can be cut down later by us for the war effort. Now, Smokey knows the truth. Smokey grew fat in a clearing created by wildfire on the berries that he found there. Smokey was born in a hollowed-out tree created by wildfire. And Bambi? Bambi? Does anybody remember the closing scene? Probably not, because you were so scared that at the end, it was really hard to see the charcoal forest and the young, abundant, emerging life on the charcoal there. And Bambi was fine. Bambi deftly jumped out of the way and then started nibbling on the new shoots that were coming up. And so all his friends also survived. Now, these same messages continue. When I first started the work that I was doing about 20 years ago, the fellow on the right was out in the woods promoting healthy forests. Well, of course, we all want healthy forests, don't we? But what is that? What is healthy forest? Very subjective term. You have to get underneath it to find out what that means. And this is what it meant at the time. They were still logging 1,000-year-old trees in the Rogue River, and that's a slightly younger me. And this is what salvage logging looks like. Salvage is a term that suggests making something good out of a bad situation. I'm going to salvage that thing and use it, very utilitarian. Well, really, it's post-fire logging on a disturbed ecosystem that is sensitive, right? And it is like giving a salt scrub to a burn victim. Or another economically stated way, it's a tax on ecological recovery. And these false frames continue. Because I like my forest green, not black. Which do you prefer? Even my 8-year-old son here tonight says, those are not the two choices we have. That's false, Dad. So this is what post-fire logging really looks like. Should we come in and log it and replant it and get it back later? No, because it removes the few trees that are left that are the biological legacies, the nurse logs for the future forest that provide the shade for the little seedlings to grow and emerge. And guess what? We'll come back to this piece, but where is all the carbon stored? In those big bowls. And we'll talk about how much is lost in fire. I would choose this, the young emerging forest. This is forests that are near where paradise burned. This is in the Sierras, and this is just a few years after fire. So that moonscape picture they showed was just immediately after the fire. They love that moonscape picture, and that's what it looks like in severely burned areas. But that's also what you find in severely burned areas, goshawk raising their young, because it's a free-for-all for them to hunt in those burned open areas. Now, when we see smoke rising up from the burning forest, we think, oh my gosh, we're having more intense wildfires than ever before, and massive amounts of carbon are being put up into the air, and it's contributing to climate change. The good news is that actually wildfire only releases between 5 to 10% of the carbon that's above ground into the atmosphere during wildfire. And here in this global carbon flux modeling from NASA, you can see as these plumes of carbon hit the Pacific Northwest, they kind of dissipate because our forests are doing what? They're massively, rapidly uptaking carbon even after they're burned, right? Now, this is a burned forest, just 20 years, beautiful, on the way to the Pacific Crest Trail outside of Eugene. Highly recommend checking it out. We see these huge plumes from California and these images, and they just kind of overwhelm us. And we think, what do we do about this with respect to climate change and carbon? Of course, this organization tries to tell us that it's the same as 3 million cars spewing carbon in the atmosphere. Well, wrong. Total false analogy. Cars don't throw above ground carbon up, do they? We don't run them using wood. We run them using things from below ground. And besides, cars don't uptake carbon. So the forests are constantly in a state of flux, emitting carbon in fires and rapidly uptaking them after carbon. That's after fires. And they don't release a lot of carbon unless they're logged. In fact, logging releases way more carbon than fire does. And so does the thinning that is recommended to reduce fire risk. It releases way more. Now, do we have bigger fires than ever before? Well, this might be hard for you to hear, but no. The answer is no, a resounding no. We have smaller fires. This is the Yacolt burn in the Columbia River Gorge. It burned 250,000 acres. This is our Oregon Department of Forestry fire history. If we look there, right, in the 1910s, when we had the Dust Bowl and the drought, we had huge fires in the Tillamook, okay? And you can just see the graph. Does it get smaller to the right? It gets smaller. And the reason fire suppression looked like it was working so well was it wasn't fire suppression. There was a cool, wet period, a cool, wet climate period from the 1940s to the 1980s that coincided with fire suppression. So some fire suppression was working, but the climate and the weather is mostly what drives fire. So here, you go back to the poster of smoking. It says, another 30 million acres will burn this year. Well, about last year, it was about 8 million. In a previous year, it was 6 million. In the last decade, it's ranged anywhere from 4 to 10 million acres. And that's not, of course, all forest land. That's grasslands, shrublands, and forest lands. So acres burned at one point in the early part of the century, last century, was 60 million acres. And then it was ranging between 30 and 60, and we're at a fraction of that. So anyone want to guess how many fires are caused by humans? 5 out of 10? 7 out of 10? 8 or 9 out of 10? It's 8 to 9 out of 10. And 50% or more of those are started on the 4th of July. Wow. Just like the one in our backyard. And I don't have the answer. I would suggest maybe there has to be more of an attitude of we're here for the forest is not here for us. Whatever it might be, whether it might be cleaning up after our pet, or whether it might be throwing a firecracker, and I guess less of a culture of entitlement. But Smokey's message surely isn't working. This is the campfire, and a lot of these fires in California, they were either started by power lines or by people or by a careless hunter, or that's the cause of these fires. And we need solutions. Now, we do have solutions for homes and communities. I have some good news. Now, if you look at this is from Paradise, from the air, and if you look right there, see the green trees? And this is what's going on with these fires, is that the fire started in the mountains, and there are 60-mile-an-hour winds driving embers down off the mountains at high speed, high velocity. And they get inside the houses through the vents, and they light them from the inside out, and they catch on fire, and they burn way hotter than forests do because they have a lot of synthetic materials. And it turns into a structure fire, and there's nothing they can do. Okay? And in most cases in California, the flame front never moves through these communities. This guy, Jack Cohen, works in the fire lab in Missoula, and he tries to light houses on fire for a living and figure out how to make them so they don't burn. So he hardens structures. And he and Alexandra Seifert, who works with the insurance industry, have been trying to tell folks that there are things we can do: hardened structures, ember-proof vents, metal roofs, rain gutter guards, clearing defensible space 100 feet from the home. That's all you need. And you can protect fires. And this stuff works, folks, because in the Tuna fire in Los Angeles, a fire actually moved through the community, 1,400 homes, and only 5 were lost. Those 5 either escaped annual monitoring or the owners put illegal cat and dog doors on them, and they burned from the inside out, 5 of them out of 1,400. So it works. Now, also smoke, what do? Well, we're going to have to live with smoke. And if any politician or somebody is telling you we're going to be able to deal with and eliminate smoke, then they're telling you everyone can live the American dream. It's the same false promise that they love to promise, but it's not true. But we can have, just like we have for floods, we can have shelters for smoke. We can have things that we do to our homes to provide safe spaces to breathe. And we're going to have to do that because we're going to have more smoke. And it doesn't just come from Oregon or Washington, it comes from Canada. Now, the wisdom of the elders, I mean, this right to burn never was given up. And this is the Yurok tribe in Northern California, and Margot Robbins and her fire team. And they are doing this right now. If you thin the forest and just empty it with logging and taking out that, and you don't burn, it's really rarely effective. And the odds for a fire to encounter that thinned area are less than 1%. So you have to assume it's going to be effective, and it's basically throwing a dart blindfolded. And because we have 350 million acres of forests. And we don't have enough money to thin them all. And do we want to thin them all and empty them and alter all of them? No. But burning is one of the best ways. Fire is nature's broom. And the Yurok peoples are still using fire to restore the Klamath bioregion on a regular basis. And we're going to need more prescribed fire, which means we're going to live with more smoke. But the idea is we'll have less big fire. We'll have less out-of-control fire. And so that's a piece that we're going to have to accept. Now, Smokey's getting hip a little bit. Check him out. What has he got in his hand? Smokey's lighting a fire. What's going on? He's doing prescribed burning, just like the Yurok. So he's starting to get into it now. This is not a big-time Smokey message. This is just a couple national forests who, have the Smokey outfit and are allowed to use it, and they're doing some prescribed fire, and they're having some fun with the camera. We need more of that. We also need other characters. This character is over there on the table, and her name is Dottie Owl, and she will be out in the world in about a month or less, and she's going to tell the best-kept secrets of wildfires, so we need other messengers. One of the other things we need to think about is different metaphors. So if an Oregonian steps out of the house and it's raining, do they call the government and say, put that rain out? I don't want to wear my rain jacket today. And likewise with hurricanes and volcanoes and floods and landslides, we don't want to create increased risks for ourselves, but do we think that we can control those? Yet we continue to think that we can control fire. Fire reseeds the forest. This is a lodgepole pine forest in Yellowstone. Fire creates a patchy, diverse landscape. Fire brings pyrodiversity to the landscape. And a lot of special things, and I would encourage all of you to get out there in a burned charcoal forest. I mean, you probably have been before, but specifically go spend some time in them. This is avalanche lily bloom that you only see because of wildfire on the north side of Hood. Trilliums and ferns popping up from the rhizomes. Some tasty fruiting bodies popping out of the burned soil. Fireweed. And look, this is just 6 months. That's Angel's Rest. Boom. Nature's constantly moving forward. And this is a 1,000-year-old Doug fir in an area that has burned multiple times, and it's still standing. And then get out there and just, act out your fantasies if you're really into Star Wars. And there's a lot of beautiful, beautiful lilies and all kinds of things in burned landscapes to find. So I hope that that gives you some perspective on wildfire. Of course, fire in the forest is like rain to a rainforest. And that's a separate question from what we need to do to protect our homes and communities. And we have real solutions where we can very smartly invest in what we do to protect those homes and not build more homes in the fire plane. Thank you.